Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're getting right to it. It's going to be incredibly direct and honestly, intensely personal. We're not just kicking around some abstract philosophical concepts here. We are taking a hard look in the mirror. Specifically, we're looking at the very convincing excuses we tell ourselves every single day to avoid the heavy weight of our own freedom. So buckle up because we're confronting a truth that most of us spend our entire lives trying to outrun. Ready?
Let's dive into Section 1, the universal lie, and the phrase we use to hide.
I want you to actually think about this for a second. Try to recall a specific moment recently where you compromised your core values, or maybe a time you stayed in a situation that was just actively hollowing you out. You probably have a very reasonable, very well-crafted story about why it happened, right? A story about a boss who handed down a strict order, a partner who made it impossible to leave, or maybe an upbringing that literally wired you to just stay silent and keep your head down.
And eventually, after telling that whole story, you inevitably reached for this: I had no choice. This is, without a doubt, the most democratic sentence in the human language. It's a shield we use to distance ourselves from the decisions we just didn't have the courage to own. I mean, it costs absolutely nothing to say, and it immediately buys you total moral immunity. But the philosopher Immanuel Kant, well, he'd tell you something you really don't want to hear. He'd call this sentence a lie. And not just a lie, but a deeply cowardly one. You see, Kant wasn't exactly interested in making us feel warm and fuzzy. He wanted to uncover the fundamental structure of morality. And he arrived at this brutal, unyielding conclusion: if you are a being capable of reason, you are inherently a being capable of choice. It is that simple and, honestly, that terrifying. Reason demands absolute ownership of your actions, which means, at the end of the day, you have absolutely no one left to blame. Moving right along to Section 2, the comfort of cowardice. Let's look at why we voluntarily surrender control.
We often assume that what keeps us from doing the right thing is just ignorance, that we simply didn't know any better. But Kant realized the real problem isn't a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of courage. He defined this state as minority or immaturity. And the really fascinating part? This inability to use your own understanding isn't some biological defect. It is completely self-imposed. We actually choose this immaturity.
And we walk right into this state of immaturity completely voluntarily. Why would we do that? Well, because, frankly, thinking for yourself is lonely. It's dangerous. It is just so much warmer and cozier to follow the crowd or blindly obey the rules. If you defer to the boss or the system, it means you aren't the one deciding. And the magic trick of human psychology is that if you aren't deciding, well, you aren't responsible. The comfort we find here is the comfort of transferred responsibility. Carrying the actual weight of being the author of your own life is terrifying, so we just happily outsource it.
Ultimately, this is the emotional core of our cowardice. We use excuses to shrink down and make ourselves invisible. We literally erase our own agency just to avoid that crushing, unbearable pressure of authorship. So let's look at how we pull this off in Section 3, negotiating with morality, and how we calculate our excuses. To really understand our bargaining, we have to look at Kant's ultimate measuring stick for morality, the categorical imperative. Listen, this isn't a suggestion. It is an uncompromising moral law that absolutely does not negotiate with your personal desires, your convenience, or your fear. It completely ignores the convenient stories we tell ourselves about why we're the exception to the rule, because in Kant's eyes, there are no exceptions, none. Notice the stark contrast here. When you say you had no choice, you're operating on the left side, under a hypothetical imperative. This is conditional. You say, if I want to keep my job, I must comply. But that isn't necessity. It's a calculation of what you're willing to pay to protect your self-interest. The categorical imperative on the right, however, points out that even under extreme pressure, you retain the capacity to reason. Therefore, you always own your actions. The brutality of this precision means that choosing the path of least resistance was still a choice you actively made.
The hypocrisy here is pretty staggering, isn't it? Most of us treat morality like a negotiation where we quietly grant ourselves a silent exemption. We'd be completely outraged if everyone else in society lied or manipulated, but when it comes to us, well, we convince ourselves our specific situation, our unique hardship, is just complicated enough to justify it.
This brings us to Section 4, true autonomy and dignity. It's about taking back authorship of your life. So on the left, we have heteronomy. This is a will governed by outside forces like social pressure, fear of loss, or the constant need for approval. You might actually feel free in this state because you're doing what you want in the moment, but you're actually just a captive to your impulses.
True autonomy, on the right, is self-legislation. It is the profound act of giving yourself a law through your own reason, and then having the unwavering dignity to obey it, even when it costs you everything.
Now, this is perhaps the hardest truth in this entire philosophy. We love to think that once we achieve a certain level of comfort or power, it'll magically be easier to do the right thing. But notice how your excuses don't disappear. They just mutate to fit your new comfort zone. The person with nothing blames survival. The person with a family and stability blames the high stakes. The powerful executive blames the system. It is a never-ending cycle of abdication.
You have to stop acting like a helpless cog in a machine. You are not a piece of code executing a pre-written program based on your environment. You are a rational agent existing in a world of other rational agents. You possess inherent agency.
We really need a massive shift in perspective here. We naturally view the crushing weight of owning our choices as this terrible burden imposed on us by a cruel world. But Kant reveals that this responsibility is actually the ultimate proof of your self-worth. It is the mark of your human dignity, a property of having a worth that cannot be traded, calculated, or substituted for a price.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, the Kantian Act, where we move from just knowing the map to actually walking the terrain.
I am challenging you directly right now. Tonight, before you go to sleep, I want you to perform this Kantian act. First, identify one decision in your life right now that you've been dressing up in the language of necessity. Second, strip away all the excuses and name it for what it actually is, a choice you are making. And third, I wanted to leave a one-word comment below this explainer, describing exactly what you've been avoiding taking responsibility for. It's time to force yourself out of your passive state.
Taking that first painful step of radical responsibility is going to sting, for sure. But that kind of brutal honesty with yourself is how you finally begin to author your own life. It is the beginning of the only work that truly matters.
Because here's the thing, you cannot unhear Kant's truth. You now know the exact difference between an excuse and a choice. Your days of hiding behind the phrase, "I had no choice," end right now. The negotiation is over. So what is the very first choice you're going to take back today?